Stop. Money isn't your enemy. Your mind is. 2,000 years ago, an emperor ruled the largest empire on earth. He faced wars, plagues, betrayal, and economic chaos. Yet Marcus Aurelius never panicked about losing money or losing power. Why? Because he followed a mindset stronger than any currency stoicism. We check our bank accounts more often than we check our thoughts. We fear debt recessions, inflation, but the Stoics believed you suffer more in imagination than in reality. And Marcus Aurelius wasn't alone. Seneca warned wealth is the slave of a wise man and the master of a fool. Epictetus said wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Even centuries later, psychology confirms the same truth. Stress comes not from events, but from our perception of them. So what if money isn't the real problem? What if your emotions, your fears, your imagination are the true debt collectors? In the next few minutes, it'll show you the Stoic code that helped Marcus stay calm while the world collapsed and how you can apply it today, even if you're exhausted in debt or uncertain about tomorrow. Because true wealth doesn't start in your wallet. It starts in your mind and spreads to every area of your life. Part 1. The real enemy isn't money. Money isn't destroying you. Your imagination is. It isn't the numbers in your bank account that break your spirit, but the stories your mind tells when you see those numbers. Every day people lose sleep, not because of what they owe, but because they imagine what the debt means. They imagine failure, judgment, the loss of respect, the loss of identity. Marcus Aurelius understood this long before modern psychology existed, and he wrote a sentence that has survived for centuries. You suffer more in imagination than in reality. Money is not your enemy. Fear is. Money is just numbers, but stress is a story. Numbers cannot control you unless the story behind them does. And the story usually sounds like this: behind. I can't catch up. I might never get out of this situation. It is this inner monologue, not the financial number itself, that crushes our spirit. If money were truly the enemy, then every wealthy person would be happy, but they're not. Research shows that almost 48% of millionaires still experience high levels of anxiety around money. They have the numbers, yet they still suffer. This proves something powerful. More money does not guarantee more peace. Money alone doesn't cure anxiety. It only changes its shape. Most people don't fear financial poverty. What they truly fear is losing control, losing identity, or losing status. But Stoicism teaches that the loss of these things doesn't mean the loss of oneself. There was a man who spent years terrified of poverty because he believed poverty meant humiliation. But when he eventually earned well, the fear didn't leave him. It grew stronger. Instead of fearing poverty, he began fearing the loss of wealth. And that's when he realized something profound. The problem was never poverty. The real problem was his belief that his value depended on his finances. Stoicism says that if your peace can be taken away, it was never real peace. The Stoics lived by a mental discipline that divided the world into two categories: what you can control and what you cannot. They believed that freedom begins the moment you stop trying to control what is outside your power. You cannot control inflation, recessions, or global markets. But you can control your spending, your skills, your mindset, your responses, and your preparation. That is your empire. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind should stand like a rock against the waves, not because the waves disappear, but because the rock refuses to move. Modern neuroscience confirms what Stoics taught centuries ago. Harvard research shows that over 70% of financial anxiety comes not from real financial events, but from anticipated scenarios, things that haven't happened yet. The brain reacts to imagined danger the same way it reacts to real danger. This is why some people shake when they open a bill, not because of the number printed on it, but because of the meaning they attach to that number. When the mind catastrophizes, even a small problem can feel like a disaster. Thus, most stress around money isn't financial, it's psychological. Stoicism reminds us that money is neutral. What gives it power is our interpretation of it. That means our interpretation can also take that power away. Imagine two people who both owe $1,000. One panics and spirals into fear. The other takes responsibility and creates a plan. One Googles how to stop stressing about money. The other Googles how to make $1,000 this month. They have the same problem, but their narratives are different. And narrative determines destiny. The Stoic approach would say that our lives are shaped not just by our circumstances, but by the way we interpret them. Marcus Aurelius faced situations far worse than most modern financial struggles. He dealt with wars, famine, disease, betrayal, and political instability. Yet he woke up every morning and wrote in his journal, "If it is outside your control, let it go. If it is inside your control, act with courage." That is the essence of Stoicism, the courage to act without relying on certainty. He never said, "I hope Rome fixes itself." Instead, he wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That is what it means to own your circumstances rather than become owned by them. Here is a simple Stoic exercise you can try tonight. Take a piece of paper and draw two columns. On the left, write, "Things I cannot control." On the right, write, "Things I can control." Then begin listing. You may discover that most of your anxiety is attached to the left side, but that side is not yours to fix. The Stoics believe that peace begins when you stop resisting reality. Neuroscientists at UCLA discovered that labeling emotions and fears reduces their intensity significantly, even by 40% or more. This means you don't need to eliminate fear to regain control. You only need to name it. Because once fear is seen clearly, it loses much of its power. Money-related shame is another heavy burden many carry in silence. Stoicism does not deny suffering, but it refuses to let suffering define us. Seneca wrote, "What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of life calls for tears." This wasn't pessimism, it was freedom. He meant that pain is universal and our financial struggles do not make us less worthy than anyone else. Financial struggle is not final judgment. It is simply a season a teacher. Stoicism teaches that we are not our circumstances. We are our responses to them. You are not your bank account. Wealth is not character. Poverty is not failure. The measure of a human being is not what they own, but what they can endure and transform. Strength grows not when life is easy, but when we choose to confront hard things without excuses. That is Stoicism, not the absence of emotion, but the refusal to be ruled by it. Not the removal of obstacles, but the mastery of response. If your greatest fear is losing what you have, then perhaps you have already lost your freedom. Because freedom built only on external conditions will always be fragile. But freedom built on clarity, discipline, and courage, that kind of freedom survives any storm. Marcus Aurelius once asked himself every morning, "Do I fear the world or do I fear my thoughts about the world?" If the second is true, then the battle is not outside us. The battle is within. And if the battle is within, then victory is also within reach. You have survived every financial challenge so far, every difficult month, every setback. Your record is perfect. You are still here, which means your strength is real. Perhaps the problem was never your capacity, but your belief in your capacity, and belief can be trained. Stoicism teaches that discipline in thought leads to discipline in action, and discipline in action leads to freedom, not the freedom of circumstance, but the freedom of mind. And this leads us to the next part of our journey, a technique Marcus Aurelius used to remove fear at the root. Psychologists today call it cognitive desensitization. The Stoics had a simpler name for it, voluntary discomfort. They practiced hardship before hardship arrived so that when difficulty came, it did not surprise them. They trained their minds to be free before life forced them to be. In the next part, we'll dive into this Stoic method away to face money stress by removing its power to scare us, because fear grows in the dark. But once you walk toward it, it fades. Stay with me. The transformation begins in the next step. Part 2, Marcus Method for Stress. If Marcus Aurelius could remain calm while the world around him was collapsing, it wasn't because he was born fearless. It wasn't because he was wealthy or powerful or protected. It was because he trained his mind long before chaos arrived. He prepared for difficulty even in times of comfort. Modern psychology calls this cognitive desensitization, but the Stoics had a simpler name for it, voluntary discomfort. The idea is profoundly simple. If you are willing to face small discomforts intentionally, then large discomforts will no longer have the power to terrify you. In other words, when you practice living with less, you learn that you are more than your circumstances. You learn that fear has limits. You learn that resilience grows in hardship. And you learn that money is not what keeps you safe, your mindset is. Marcus understood that comfort can be a silent poison. A person who becomes too comfortable becomes emotionally fragile. They fear loss. They fear change. They fear anything that disrupts routine. But the Stoics believe that strength does not grow in perfect conditions. Strength grows when we step willingly into challenge. Marcus once wrote, "Do not be surprised when hardship arrives. Instead, train to meet it." He also said the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This means that challenges do not block your path. Challenges are the path. Running away from discomfort does not build safety. Running toward it builds power. Let me tell you a story. There was a young merchant who lived in ancient Rome, known for being extremely wealthy. He had silk spices servants, a beautiful home, but he could not sleep. Every night he feared losing everything. One day he went to a Stoic philosopher and said, "Teach me to never worry again." The philosopher didn't give him lectures. He didn't tell him to be positive. Instead, he told him to spend 1 week living as if he were poor. No luxuries, no servants, no fine meals, just plain food, simple clothing, and silence. The merchant was shocked, but he obeyed. And by the end of that week, something changed. He realized he could survive without what he thought was essential. He realized his fear was bigger than the reality itself. And then the philosopher said, "Now you know. You were never afraid of poverty. You were only afraid of your imagination." That is voluntary discomfort, the practice of preventing fear from controlling you. You can try this yourself. Once a week, eat a simple meal. Once a week, avoid unnecessary spending. Once a week, walk instead of drive. Once a week, deliberately choose the uncomfortable option. When you do this, something powerful happens inside of you. Your brain learns that comfort is optional. Your confidence expands. Fear shrinks. You begin to realize you don't need as much as you thought. Seneca wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest of fare." Ask yourself then, is this the condition that I feared? Science now confirms that voluntary discomfort reduces anxiety by reducing attachment. When you choose simplicity, you no longer fear losing comfort. When fear cannot attach to anything, it often disappears. Many people assume that Stoicism is about being cold, emotionless, or unfeeling. That is not true. Stoicism is emotional strength built through emotional honesty. It does not tell you to ignore pain. It teaches you how to master pain. It does not deny fear. It teaches you how to prevent fear from dominating your decisions. The Stoics did not run from discomfort. They trained with it. Just like a warrior trains with weapons before the battle, Stoics trained their minds before hardship arrived. That is why voluntary discomfort works. You may think that modern financial worries are different, but they're not. Fear is fear. Whether it's fear of losing wealth or fear of losing status, it is still a story the mind creates. And when you train your mind to live without excess, you regain control of the narrative. There is another side to voluntary discomfort that is rarely discussed. It is not only about preparing for financial hardship, it is about discovering what truly matters. When Marcus imagined losing everything, wealth, comfort, even his throne, he didn't do it because he was pessimistic. He did it to find out what would remain if everything else was taken away. What remains when status disappears? What remains when luxury fades? What remains when life removes everything unnecessary, only what is essential? And what is essential cannot be taken from you, not by recession, not by debt, not by circumstance. As Epictetus said, wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. A person who wants less is harder to break. A person who needs less fears less. Here is a practical exercise. Try spending 1 day with no social media, no entertainment, no comfort food, and no impulsive purchases. Spend that day doing only what is necessary. Get up, work, eat simply, walk, reflect. Before bed, ask yourself, did I survive? Did I grow weaker or stronger? You might be surprised. Many people report that they feel calmer during voluntary discomfort than they do during luxury. Why? Because their dopamine resets. Their mind becomes quieter. They discover that much of their anxiety came not from hardship, but from overstimulation and constant consumption. Neuroscientists call this the dopamine detox. Stoics called it self-discipline. And there is more. You may discover during voluntary discomfort that wealth was never the true reward. The reward is control. Not control over the outside world, but control over your reactions. Control is confidence. Confidence is calm, and calm is the foundation of courage. Marcus Aurelius said, "Man is disturbed not by events, but by his opinion of events." If this is true, then how do we change that opinion? The answer is practice. The brain rewires through repetition. Voluntary discomfort is training, and every training session strengthens the mind. Someone might say, but isn't this harsh? Doesn't this approach remove the joy of life? The answer is no. Stoicism does not remove joy, it restores it. When you constantly chase comfort, comfort loses its meaning. When you constantly feed desire, desire becomes endless. When you constantly seek pleasure, pleasure loses its power. But when you remove excess, joy becomes sharper. The taste of plain bread feels rich. A simple walk feels peaceful. Gratitude rises naturally. And you realize that loss is simply a test of attachment. If you can live with less, you can live with strength. The true purpose of voluntary discomfort is not to suffer, is to free yourself from the illusion that suffering must be avoided. Life will bring discomfort whether we want it or not. The question is whether we meet it unprepared or whether we meet it trained. The Stoics chose training. Modern neuroscience agrees. Studies show that exposure to manageable discomfort increases emotional resilience, reduces cortisol levels, and improves decision-making under stress. What Stoics practiced instinctively, science now confirms. Voluntary discomfort teaches the mind a powerful message: I may not control everything, but I can handle more than I thought. When you prove to your mind that survival is possible without constant comfort, you break the cycle of fear. The mind no longer sees discomfort as danger. And once discomfort ceases to be danger, fear has nowhere to live. By practicing simplicity, you don't become weaker, you become untouchable. The Stoics believe that a person who knows how to live with little becomes invincible. Marcus could rule an empire because he first ruled himself. Seneca could face exile because he practiced losing before he actually lost. Epictetus could endure slavery because he trained with difficulty before difficulty arrived. This is the invitation of Stoicism, not to escape stress, but to rise above it. And that brings us to a turning point. What if the goal is not to escape money stress, but to become stronger than it? What if financial hardship is not the enemy, but the teacher? What if the real prison is not debt, but the belief that debt defines your destiny? You do not need perfect circumstances to be free. You need clarity and courage. And voluntary discomfort builds both. The next time you face money anxiety, remember this: fear speaks loudest before it breaks. Let it speak. Stand firm, stay calm, and act. Now that we understand the Stoic approach to facing stress before it arrives, we are ready for the next step. Because there is a modern strategy rooted in Stoicism and backed by neuroscience that can reduce anxiety dramatically. It transforms stress into structure, emotion into clarity, chaos into order. And this strategy begins with writing. Let's continue. The real power awaits in the next part. Part 3, Modern Practical Stoic Strategy. Money stress often feels like chaos, uncertain, unpredictable, overwhelming. But chaos is not the enemy. It simply lacks structure. To the Stoic, structure begins with awareness. That's why Marcus Aurelius wrote every morning, not because he was confused, but because he wanted to remain clear. Writing was his way of separating truth from imagination. When fear stays in the mind, it grows. When it meets paper, it shrinks. Tonight, try what both ancient Stoics and modern psychologists recommend. Take a sheet of paper and draw 2 columns. On the left, write what I cannot control. On the right, write what I can control. In the first column, you might write inflation, recession, layoffs, unpredictable bills. In the second, my spending, my skills, my habits, my mindset. That second column is your foundation. That is your freedom. Neuroscience confirms this practice reduces anxiety because fear loses power when it is clearly seen. You don't have to solve everything right now. You just need clarity on what actually belongs to you. Here's why it works: when stress is high, the emotional brain takes over. But writing activates the rational brain. And when your mind becomes organized, your decisions become stronger. Marcus Aurelius never wrote to complain, he wrote to lead himself. That is the essence of Stoicism: direction, not perfection. Movement, not magic. Begin where you are, with one action, not with every action. Let me share a short story. A doctor once worked 80 hours a week, earned good money, but felt empty. One day he wrote a single question on a piece of paper: I am working for income, but am I working for meaning? That question changed his direction. He adjusted his lifestyle, learned new skills, coached others, and found purpose beyond profit. He said, I didn't escape stress by earning more. I escaped stress by thinking more clearly. That shift didn't begin with success. It began with honesty. Financial stress feels powerful when your actions don't align with your values. That's why Stoics believe progress must be intentional. Powerful change is built on small alignments, thoughts that serve life, actions that reflect those thoughts, habits that reinforce those actions. You don't need dramatic change. You need consistency. One step each day is stronger than one burst of effort followed by collapse. As the Stoics said, persist and resist. Imagine your life as a ship. You cannot control the ocean, but you can adjust your sails. The economy is the wind, but your habits decide direction. When your habits are strong, stress loses its grip. That's why a simple Stoic nightly practice works incredibly well. Ask yourself 2 questions before bed. Did money control my emotions today? And what small action can I take tomorrow to control my money instead? These questions build metacognition, the ability to think about your thoughts. Over time, this builds emotional armor, not to hide your feelings, but to lead them. Comparison is another source of money stress. We see others doing more, earning more, and we assume we are falling behind. But comparison has a trap. It pulls the mind out of the present moment. The Stoics rejected comparison as a measure of success. Epictetus said, if you wish to be happy, make your opinions match your experience. Live your life, not someone else's. A person earning little but living with calm may be richer than someone earning much but losing peace. Wealth is not always visible. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it lives in the mind, not in the wallet. To strengthen both mindset and finances, use this Stoic framework every week: intention, execution, reflection. Intention asks, what matters? Execution asks, what action will I take? Reflection asks, did I act with clarity, or did fear make my choices? The Stoic path doesn't demand perfection. It simply requires presence. When you live with presence, panic fades, fear becomes information, and life returns to your hands. The highest form of wealth is not money, but power over one's own reactions. That is true stability. Economy goes up and down. Opportunities appear and vanish. But inner strength sustains itself. No stock market can take it. No recession can erase it. Marcus said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He never said you must control everything. He only said you must control yourself. Everything you need to begin is already within reach. Begin with clarity. Continue with consistency. And let your actions become the language your future understands. Your financial position does not define you. Your response to it does. Money stress is not the end. It is the signal. The call to align your mind, focus your actions, and build your character, not in perfect conditions, but in real ones. And when real strength forms inside you, fear begins to fade. Soon you may discover something deeper, that the goal was never money alone. The goal was becoming someone capable, someone steady, someone worthy of trust. Because when your mind becomes strong, life begins to follow. Stoicism doesn't promise ease. It promises growth. It teaches you that even in difficult times, you can refine your purpose, and when purpose reveals itself, stress transforms into fuel. Now that you understand this strategy, we arrive at the most important question of all. How do we turn financial struggle into inner freedom and live not with fear, but with purpose? Let's go there together. Part 4, from money stress to purpose and inner freedom. What if money stress isn't the end of your peace? What if it's the beginning of your purpose? What if fear is not here to break you, but to wake you? Many people believe that life becomes meaningful once they're financially secure, but the Stoics believe the opposite. They believed meaning comes when we face what scares us and ask, what does this challenge want me to learn? Marcus Aurelius said, the impediment to action becomes the action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He didn't see stress as punishment. He saw it as direction. Sometimes financial struggle does not appear to destroy us, but to refine us. When you feel stress, maybe your mind is trying to tell you something. Maybe it's time to strengthen your discipline. Maybe it's time to update your skills. Maybe it's time to realign your values. People often don't change when they change when they must. Stress can be the signal that tells you there is more in you than you are currently using. Seneca wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. That means your struggle may be the very thing that builds your strength. A powerful way to transform money stress into purpose is to ask better questions. Instead of why is this happening to me, ask what can I build from this? Instead of when will I escape this? Ask what skill will this pressure develop in me? Epictetus taught that circumstances do not define use, our responses do. He said we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. And in that choice, purpose is born. Here's a practical approach. Every week, write 3 lines in your journal. First, what stressed me financially this week? Second, what did I learn from it? Third, what small action will I take next? This transforms stress into feedback, and feedback into clarity. When you act on clarity, you begin to rise above circumstance. Purpose does not appear in comfort. Purpose appears when we decide to respond with intention. There was a woman who was overwhelmed with debt and fear. For months, she believed she was falling behind. But one day she asked a Stoic question: what if this debt is not the end, but the start of my discipline? She began tracking her spending, learning new skills, and paying off her debt a little at a time. After 2 years, she was free not just financially, but mentally. She said, debt didn't destroy me. It introduced me to my resilience. That's the essence of Stoicism, not avoiding difficulty, but transforming through it. True wealth is not the amount of money you hold. True wealth is the strength of your mindset. If you keep clarity, discipline, and courage, no economic cycle can break you. Marcus wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Even now, this applies. You may not control inflation, but you control your decisions. You may not control uncertainty, but you control your preparation. The greatest freedom is knowing that life cannot take away your ability to respond. When you respond with purpose, that is wealth. Your life does not need to change overnight. It needs direction. Even one decision made with clarity can shift the path. When discipline grows, fear shrinks. When purpose grows, stress becomes fuel. Maybe the goal is not to avoid financial stress, but to become stronger than it. To use it as a signal that invites your better self to rise. Purpose isn't born in perfect environments. It is built in pressure. And pressure is not always an enemy. It might be a mentor. You don't need to be fearless. You only need to be willing. Willing to act, willing to learn, willing to ask, who can I become through this challenge? Because that question leads to transformation. The Stoics believed that we are not here merely to survive, but to grow into someone we would be proud to meet. Someone steady, someone capable, someone disciplined, someone who leads their life instead of being led by circumstance. Perhaps money stress is simply life asking you to upgrade not just your income, but your identity. Strength rarely appears without resistance. Peace rarely appears without clarity. Purpose rarely begins without a question. And maybe deep down, that question is already forming within you. If so, listen to it. Because stress may have brought you here, but clarity can take you further, and purpose can carry you forward in a direction you never expected. If this message hit, you didn't just watch. Practice it. And if you want weekly Stoic lessons applied to modern life, subscribe to Making Life Better and join the community of warriors who train their minds, not just their wallets. Because money comes and goes, but inner peace is wealth that no one can ever take from you. Now, I want you to do one thing. Comment this word below: peace. Say it once. Write it down. Own it. Because the moment you choose peace over panic, your transformation has already begun.